Does this word not sound like the death bird, calling your name at midnight? Beware you never say it, for then the pictures of life will fade to shadows. Haunting dreams will climb forth from your heart and feed on your blood. So I'm sure a good chunk of you all first encounter with this horror icon was from this episode of SpongeBob.
Nosferatu!
I know mine was. Good old Nosferatu. Now, in the spirit of Christmas, I have been deep diving in the realm of vampires, mainly because the new Nosferatu movie is coming out on Christmas. And I was like, I wasn't super gonna be like, yeah, I want to watch the movie. There's other movies at the end of this year that I'm really excited for. But I am a fan of the horror genre, although I will say I'm more of the older horror films is what I enjoy a lot. Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw. I really enjoy those. New ones, I could, do it out. But so Nosferatu, I eventually just I'm going to watch the trailer for the new one. And I got kind of hype a little bit. I was like, oh, William Dafoe. And then me being the person I am, I will hyper fixate on it. And the next thing you know, I'm deep diving really, really into it. And then next thing you know, I'm like, oh, wow. So Nosferatu was based on Dracula, and it was kind of the lore on, I don't feel like I need to explain it too much, but brief history is Bram Stoker's Dracula was written in 1897. That was a long time ago. And then Nosferatu was 1922. And basically it was an unauthorized, I wouldn't say parody, kind of parody of Dracula. And then I believe Bram Stoker's wife was burn all the copies, and they try to burn all the copies and get rid of them. But, Nosferatu spread decent amount enough that luckily it was not considered lost media, and thus Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, has become its own legend of its own. But now in this research I've been doing, I started actually reading Dracula. I actually have only 7 chapters left as far as I'm recording it, and I actually watched Nosferatu when I started Dracula. I was only 5 chapters in, and I was kind of worried about watching Nosferatu and then reading Dracula at the same time, because spoilers, if they're pretty parallel, which so far there are a lot of things in Nosferatu that oh, this is basically just a somewhat, I wouldn't say parody, but summary of Dracula, Bram Stoker's original book, which you can actually get free from the Project Gutenberg, is that what it's called? This site. But anyways, after actually reading Dracula, there's so much more that's in Dracula that just not in Nosferatu, with most adaptations, right? But yeah, with that said, I actually could go on quite a bit about Dracula. Man, I have so much I could say about the book Dracula. Did you know there's a cowboy? There's a cowboy from Texas in Dracula. That is one of the crazy, Quincy, that's a crazy character to have in a Dracula book. And then you have Van Helsing, who has Van Helsing, all these iconic people, in horror fiction and stuff. It's just so funny and frustrating too, because Van Helsing's he's a lawyer, doctor, philosopher. Why are you all these things? And low key, I have hot takes on Van Helsing that I won't really get into, but I could. And same with some of the characters. But overall, it's I don't want to spoil anything of the book if anyone ever wants to read the book. But there's some funny and both it's a chilling book, and there are some things about it that are outdated. Don't get me wrong, but definitely in my top 5 books. Up there with Frankenstein and stuff. Anyways, moving on from that, let's just Dracula's great. If you really want to read it, go read the book. I've been having a blast reading it. Back to Nosferatu. So yeah, Nosferatu, there are differences. The boat, the part where Nosferatu's on a boat and he's going to, where's he going to? London? I can't remember. Which I learned that movie, The Voyage of the Demeter, that's basically just chapter 7 of Dracula, which I didn't even know that, which is kind of cool now you really think about it. There's so much lore you can extract from Dracula. Even the word Nosferatu comes from the book Dracula. Actually, it was used in Dracula, but I think it dates further back. And Nosferatu actually invented the whole sunlight burning vampire, killing them, apparently. Anyways, I was starting to watch Nosferatu, and I realized there are a couple Nosferatu movies. At this point, I believe there's actually quite a bit. And there's also quite a bit of releases and remakes, or kind of. So there's the 1922 one, right? And that's the one I watched. And then there is Nosferatu 1979. Nosferatu the Vampyre. And then there's The Shadow of a Vampire, which William Dafoe is... it is I believe he's Nosferatu, and it's basically like, what if you were filming Nosferatu and you hired like an actual vampire to play it? It's supposed to be like a really good movie, and I want to basically watch all these Nosferatu movies leading up to the new one coming out this year, because it's just really fun, and in these trying times of like so much media that's just pumped out, and it's kind of like, I've kind of already seen this, right? I want to look back at some classics. I do love classic media, and would be the first silent film I've ever watched, and may I say it's a watch. It is so interesting to watch these old movies. I also will say there is another version of Nosferatu. It's just a remaster version, and the soundtrack is just by Typo Negative. And I was like, that sounds cool. And actually, I think you can just watch it on YouTube. Actually, Nosferatu is in the public domain. Yeah, you could just watch Nosferatu on YouTube. That's pretty much what I did. Or on Freevee or whatever. Like it's just out there. There's like different versions of it, kind of. There's colorized, and I watched half of it colorized, and the rest I'm like, you know what? I want to switch to black and white, and I did do that. I could probably even put a YouTube link in here for it if you really want to watch it. But yeah, there's a version with Typo Negative soundtrack, and I thought this is really cool. But then I put it on, and it's basically just Typo Negative songs put in there. It's like a music video, and it was cool, kind of. But it would have been cool if they actually did an original soundtrack. R.I.P. Peter still. But yeah, so yeah, I just kind of want to talk about like my experience watching the first one and the rest of these movies. But yeah, the first one was an interesting watch. I started it, and it's interesting to see the techniques and stuff that they used in olden days. A lot of the footage is it's almost felt like I don't know if this is just a version I watched, but it felt very sped up, almost like stop motion-y, very choppy in some places. But it was so interesting to see that there's a symphony playing on with the music, and just how much of the movie is, honestly, it is very beautiful to watch. Like, I feel like a lot of the movies have to really outdo themselves in as far as like acting and expressive, and they focus heavily a lot on scenery too, and setting an atmosphere, because you can't really convey a whole lot with thoughts and speaking. So like that brings me to like some of the contrasts of like characters in Nosferatu versus Dracula. You have basically like parallels to the characters of both. So like the main character in Dracula, well, not I would say the main one, but like one of the first people you get introduced to is Jonathan Harker, who is like he's like a real estate agent, kind of, I don't know, who's gonna go visit Dracula because he's like buying a new property. And then the parallel to that person in Nosferatu is Thomas Hunter, who Jonathan, I feel like very early on in the book, he's very like he's a pretty normal dude, and then I felt in Nosferatu Thomas was a little more expressive, a little more goofy, a little more like pish posh, because like there's like a scene where the town folks are warning him about like, don't go to Count Orlok's castle, there's vampires there, then he's like, wow, I'm pish posh, and then has like, it's funny, has like the little text pop up, right? And then you read it like, that's funny, and there's different acts. There's an act in the movies, and within each act, it like, sometimes it'll give you like just a paragraph of like the overall scene of what's happening. Like I said, it was very interesting to watch a silent movie for the first time in my life, and it being Nosferatu was interesting. But so Vlad Dracula, Count Orlok, the dreaded one, the death bird or whatever. So like in Dracula the book, he's this is one of the first times, I believe, with Bram Stoker's that you have a suave like kind of vampire, not really humanizing him just yet. It would be years later until we got stuff like Interview with a Vampire, or Twilight, I guess. But Dracula's still very much a villain, although Nosferatu really just kind of makes be more of a villain and a monster. He does speak, he does like have conversations with Thomas Hunter, but it's just very much like diabolical. He like, it's kind of straight to the point. In the book, like, yeah, Dracula does all these crazy stuff too, right? But they make him more freakishly. They make him more ominous. You can see all these like stills and like these images and clips I'm sure most of you have seen throughout your life, right? But yeah, with that first movie, it's a horror classic, but I'm not gonna sit here and say that like it's like my favorite movie, although it's a movie that I can definitely see myself watching again at some point, because I guess I feel the same way about a lot of other kind of horror monster movies that I've watched. like a good one, and it's one that I will probably use for the rest of my life, is like Godzilla. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that every Godzilla movie, especially like older, like Showa and Heisei, are like peak movies, or even Millennium, but there's a lot of them that like, man, I can tell you right now the plot sucks. But like I like to watch these older movies because I love the artistry of it. Especially like with Godzilla, like suitmation, the practical effects, and especially with like Nosferatu, it was beautiful to watch the effects and like how they did these things. There are some parts I'm like, wow, how did I do that? Like when Nosferatu gets hit with sunlight, he like fades away. There are just parts where, like, from what I know of how older media was made, there are sometimes it'll show like a still of like scenery, and I wonder, like, oh, I wonder if that's like a painting or something like that, this pre-CGI, you know what I mean? And that's one thing I love about older movies, and going back to literally silent film, like some of the first movies ever made, and just watching that artistry, watching it, seeing what they had to work with, definitely there are parts where I'm like, that was a little weird. There's one part where, so like Nosferatu created the myth of basically vampires dying in sunlight, but there are parts where like Nosferatu comes outside and it's clear as day that it is daylight. The film is black and white, right? And they technically technicolor it, whatever, and they make it look like light outside. Like you could see his shadow, and I'm like, well, maybe they did that because they couldn't film at night, but then there are scenes where they're filming and it looks dark. So I don't know, like there's one part where Count Orlok comes, he comes to like the place where he needs to come. He's off the boat and he's terrorizing the town, and he's just like carrying his coffin in broad daylight. It looks like broad daylight, and it made me laugh like so much. I just wondered, like, why couldn't they film that at night? Like, was it because it was dark? But like there was a scene later where I see like a policeman like lighting a lantern in the dark. So I don't know if maybe it was a time constraint thing or what it was, but it is funny because he's straight up just like carrying his coffin in broad daylight, and he just looks so it's like a far away like landscape shot, and he's just kind of smaller in the screen, just carrying my coffin out here on these streets. It's so funny. But with that said, overall, Nosferatu, if you are really into horror and if you really are excited for this new movie, I would encourage you to go down this deep dive like I am. You don't maybe have to go as far as reading Dracula. I mean, it's a good book. I recommend it personally. But with the first Nosferatu, I at least like it would be, I just really want to, I feel like I would really appreciate the new 2024 Nosferatu more having watched like where it came from. It's another reason why, I mean, back to Godzilla, I enjoyed like Godzilla X Kong and Godzilla -1 so much because I've seen the history of where it came from, and I absolutely love watching a journey like that, watching like when people make remakes and I do appreciate a good reboot from time to time. Like, what can we do with this story now? How far can we take it? And it's exciting to see the lore of it. From what I know, the second or Shadow of a Vampire with William Dafoe, like he's gonna be in it, and then also like the guy who played Renfield, who was a character in the original Dracula, who also played in the Renfield movie with Nicolas Cage, is going to be in it from what I know. So like seeing all this come together, which Renfield is also a great movie. I saw it in theaters with my friends. It was really good. Go watch that too. I might just go watch a bunch of Dracula media. There's so much Dracula media. Oh my gosh. Like I can't even describe like how much Dracula media there is out there. But anyways, that was the first Nosferatu 1920. So let's try to cut to the second one here. I've talked a lot about the first one, but let's pop over here. Let's try to make this quick because I'm trying to fit 3 movies in one video. 1979's Nosferatu the Vampyre. Boy, oh boy, was this movie a roller coaster of a ride, is all I can tell you with that. In a way though, side note, I've been reading Dracula more, and I'm on the last chapter. I probably will finish this chapter tonight after we're done recording this section of the video. But so with that said, why I said that, because it's giving me more insight on, I was never a person who read books and then watched movies. Usually the only book I remember actually reading first and then watching the movie was Percy Jackson, and I remember being like, I read the book first, But the more I read Dracula and then I go and watch like adaptations of it, I can slowly start to understand why adaptations cut things, why they change things, why they condense things. So in the first Nosferatu, the OG one, right, it was, an adaptation, an unofficial adaptation of Dracula, right? And, because of that, they changed some of the characters' names. In this one, they don't change characters' names. One of the first characters you meet in the book Dracula is Jonathan Harker. And in this adaptation movie, Jonathan's in it, Lucy, who's another character in Dracula, Van Helsing's in it. But where they did change some things is in the book, Jonathan is married to Mina and Lucy is married to Arthur. So, but in this movie, Jonathan's married to Lucy, and Van Helsing doesn't really play that much of a role, and like I don't even think Mina's character is technically in it. So yeah, it was basically Dracula, but they used the Nosferatu name and imagery, and then they kind of more or less copied the storyline of the first Nosferatu, which is also a copy of Dracula, but like very different. Like as I'm almost done with this book, there's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot that they cut out. And I could see it because there's a lot of like, technically, if you really want to get technical, I think you can turn Dracula into 3 separate movies. The first part, which, you know, I don't think I feel I need to put a spoiler because it's 100 years old, but like first part is like, you know, Jonathan going to meet Dracula and the horrors that ensues. There's that. And then there's a whole subplot where like Lucy is like becoming a vampire. And then there's the last part where, you know, Scooby and the gang, they're going to go fight Dracula. But 3 movies are there. And then again, you know, like I said, they turned the boat ride, you know, where Dracula kills all the people on the boat into its own movie too. So like there's a lot of sources material in that. So yeah, I could go on about that, but this version of Dracula, Nosferatu the Vampire, I loved it so much. And I can tell you, and I'm gonna sit here and tell you why I love it so much. Number one, in the opening of the movie, there were kitties playing around, and I love that. And in fact, the first Nosferatu movie had kitties as well. I love that so much. But why I love this movie so much, and why I'm going to make it my identity for the next 3 to 5 weeks, is the interpretation of Nosferatu alone, which in this one, he is not Nosferatu. They do say Nosferatu at one point, but he's basically Dracula the Count, right? You know, it's basically the Nosferatu name and Nosferatu imagery with just the Dracula characters, but there are some things changed, right? But this version of Dracula is my absolute favorite. It is, Klaus Kinski, the person who played this version of Dracula, I was mesmerized by his acting, by his little demeanor, you know. In the same way, whenever in Furiosa, when they put the prosthetic nose on Chris Hemsworth, and then they'd probably just turn on the camera and let him do whatever he want. I feel that was the exact same method they used with Klaus here. They put the makeup on him and they said, action. That's what they did. That's what I felt like they did. And not gonna lie, the rest of back in 1979, when you probably first watched this movie, most people probably thought this movie was boring. Low key, this movie is actually very boring. It's a very stylized, atmospheric, romanticized version of Dracula. Like, it's more about like looking at the shots and everything. Like it's fairly slow of a movie, I'm not gonna lie. Like, there are very slow, boring parts, which kind of in the book Dracula, that happens too. Dracula as a story is kind of like roller coaster going up, then it goes down, and then it goes back up, then it goes down, and then it's back up again. That's pretty much like how Dracula works. But like I said, what makes this movie perfect and amazing to me is the acting of Klaus, because it is so funny to me. It is so absolutely, this movie is supposed to be a horror, but I was laughing the entire time, because I can only imagine, and this is something like every time I finish a chapter in Dracula, I'll go on Reddit and just see what people say about it. And I've seen a couple people ask, like, I wonder what it was like reading Dracula back in these days, especially being like, you know, a Christian person or a religious person reading these like crazy stories about like basically demonic creatures, you know, and using using communion waivers to lure them off, which is one of the funniest things that happens in the entire book. But yeah, like, I wonder what it was like reading those stories, you know, because like reading them now, you're like, oh, okay, there's like, that's an outdated thing that happens. But back then, that was just like, I'm sure a lot of people really thought vampires were real. And, you know, I'm sure people still, there may be a few out there. I'm sure, definitely. Let your freak flag fly, right? But why I'm saying this is, when I was watching it and I was watching his acting, he is so creepy. He is absolutely creepy as Nosferatu. And every little thing that he does is just like, it's like watching a baker make a cake, and I'm just like, oh, I never thought to put like that there, you know. Yeah, cool, yeah, slay. And it makes me laugh, because if I was actually in that situation, like if I was actually Jonathan meeting Nosferatu for the first time and I saw his face, I'd be like, what's going on with you, sir? Like, why do you look like that? I would be freaking out. And everything that he does, it's freaky. Like, if I was in that situation, it was it'd been freaky. Like, when they're first eating dinner together, the whole time Dracula's just like, the worst part, he's a mouth breather, but the little fangs sticking out. Like, and it's funny because usually Dracula has like the canine fangs, but no, his fangs are these 2 little buck teeth, little Chucky SpongeBob teeth, right? And he's just breathing so heavily, just staring at Jonathan. And then Jonathan comes to stuff, and he's like, oh, like, he's like basically just like, what just did you just pre there? Like, what was going on? And he's like, I need to drink it before it becomes affected. And he's like, no, I'm good, bro, I'm good, you know. And then he does it anyways, just, and then he like creepily moves towards him, and then he's like, yo, what you doing? And he's like, we should rest for the night, you know. There's just things that he says that I'm like, time in as an abyss, profound as 1,000. Like, what? I'm just trying to get my groceries, ma'am. I'm just trying to, whatever. This is a Wendy's. And it's funny. It's funny to me because, like I said, if I was in that situation, I would be terrified. I would be like, can you let me do what I have to do, right? And like everything he does, and it just makes me laugh. It just makes me laugh. And I don't know because I have a twisted humor, and I've been watching enough horror movies to kind of know like some certain things, but it's really funny. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so, but basically the story, some of the differences in the first Nosferatu versus this one is it's pretty similar up until the point of like, I mean, they even did the quarantine scene, which I found very interesting. There's like a scene where like, basically Dracula or Nosferatu brings rats on a boat and they're like spreading plagues, and everybody like says like, yeah, this might be a plague, and they all go run home and like don't tell anybody, and then like half the people die, and they're trying to quarantine people, but they just die, and it's like, dang, like you can only do so much when Dracula brings the plague, right? He's playing 4D chess on these people. That was something that stayed the same, yeah, which was in both movies, but where it gets kind of weird, I want to say weird, but so I believe the story kind of puts the plot of Lucy more as like a hero figure, and that wasn't really seen in she was more of a just kind of there in the first one, and honestly most characters were just there, I guess, because the movie ends with like Nosferatu was trying to drink the older version, which is Ellen blood, and then the sunlight rises and like he kind of just dies, and it's very anticlimactic. But in this one she's like seeing like all the patterns of like, oh, what's causing these plagues and these people dying, and she finds out, but like nobody like listens to her. And this is the point where Van Helsing, she goes to Van Helsing, he's like a doctor, right? He's like, I figured out what's happening, and he's like, well, I don't know if I could believe you on this, which is funny because in the book Van Helsing is the one who's like, yeah, vampires are real, although he takes freaking forever to tell everybody, which I can complain about that. I can go on about Van Helsing as a character in the book, but that's a whole other argument, a whole other different video. I might make a whole video about Van Helsing, but I could tell you the same thing, that Van Helsing is the same in the book versus in the movie. In this movie he's still a little misogynistic to some degree, but yeah, nobody believes Lucy, and then she kind of has to take matters in her own hand to some degree. So basically what she does in this version is she tricks Nosferatu. I want to say tricks, seduces, I guess him is the word, to like have her drink her blood all night long. And that's a creepy scene in itself when that happens, because Nosferatu, for the most of the movie, he's just gallivanting around town, which I believe is in Germany. He's gallivanting. Wismar, I believe, is where he's at. Anyways, some of the things that he does before he goes, the plot of the movie ends, right, and he goes drinks Lucy blood. I can read some of the notes that I put here. One, he does he does this in the first movie and in this movie. He gets off the boat and he's looking around like the way he does it. He's like the burglar from Home Alone. Like, is anybody see me? And he goes put his coffin in a little area, and as he runs out of the building, the torn down abandoned building, he sees a crucifix, and he looks at it and goes and then just keeps running. And there's just scenes where he's just almost like skipping around town. Like there's like these still like landscape shots of him just like skipping around town. And then there's like scenes in the night where like Renfield escapes the insane asylum, which Renfield was a little weird and insane and creepy, but that's kind of cool that they did that. I thought that was like, okay, he played an insane person very well. But he goes to his master and he's like, I'll do your bidding, sire. And then the same way Jonathan was like pushing like Nosferatu away in the beginning part of the movie, Dracula was doing the same too. He was like, keep your distance, buddy, and go do the thing. Get out here. Get in my face. You've been giving me orders. Get that. Oh, so yeah, like this acting was peak. That's really what made the movie watchable for me. And now at this point in my life, I want to go own this movie, on like DVD or Blu-ray, because it's a movie that like I want to show people for the rest of my life, to be like, hey, have you seen the 1979 adaptation of Nosferatu the Vampire based off Bram Stoker's Dracula and the 1922 original Nosferatu? No, you haven't? Let me put it on real quick, and then just watch people's face like, what am I watching? And I'll be like, yep, exactly that. Yeah, anyways, Nosferatu's being creepy. Very creepy. Does very creepy things to Lucy. I don't think I need to go into the exact detail of what he does. But, you can watch it yourself. Nothing too bad, but, like, it's very, like, bro. So she tricks Nosferatu into drinking her blood the rest of the night. He can't help himself. He's a creep. And then, by the time he's done, he's like, oh, my God, it's morning. He hears the chickens, the roosters crowing or whatever, and then he sees the sun, and he just goes... His death is just so... It's even more anticlimactic than I think than the 1922 version, where he kind of just fades away. No, he just kind of just like... and passes out, and like he's on the ground dead. And I'm like, okay, well, is that it? And then Van Helsing comes in and he's like, Lucy's dead. What do I do now? Okay, well, this vampire's here. Let me drive a stake in his heart. And then the rest of the movie, Jonathan's like out of commission. The rest of the movie, he's just not doing anything. Like pretty much once he gets back from the castle, he just doesn't do anything because he's like sick and paley. Which I have some theories of what's going on there, but we'll get to that. Well, I don't have theories. I know what happens because I finished the movie. But so that's important. Van Helsing, after being like a supernatural denier, which is like totally opposite of what he is in the book, he goes in there, stabs Dracula in the heart. After Jonathan's like, don't stab him, and then after he stabs Dracula, Jonathan's like, oh, my heart too. Jonathan basically calls the police, little weasel on Van Helsing, and they're like. And this is a very comedic, like, I don't know, maybe like Monty Python-esque kind of like bit here where, so all the town folks have pretty much died from the plague. And the guy's like, he committed a murder. He's like, well, can you prove that? Vivan's like, can you prove that or whatever? And he's like, well, that's up for the courts to decide, I guess, And then he goes like, arrest this man. And the guy like arrested him's like, he's like a regular average Joe. And he's like, I've never arrested anybody. He's like, well, you can arrest them. This is your first arrest. He's like, well, where do I take him? There's like no one to watch him in like the jail cells, and it's just like, I was wholeheartedly expecting this guy to be like, I guess I can just take you to my house and you can stay in my guest room for the time being. And they kind of just take Van Helsing out, and it's just like, wow, that was a little like, okay, yeah. The movie just ends like that. Well, at the very least, Jonathan does some weird stuff, but it's obvious that he becomes a vampire now, because his teeth grows and he becomes pale, and which is kind of like, I don't know if I needed that as my ending. Like I said, I haven't finished the actual Dracula book just yet, but at no point does Jonathan show any signs that he's converting to a vampire. If anything, it's his wife. Spoilers. But yeah, so it was kind of a lame ending. Like I said, the movie, I heard it did well for the most part as far as critiques go. At least I think it did. I don't know. I just according to like, you look up a basic wiki thing on this, but for the most part, like, I'd watch it again just to like show it to my friends. It'd be one of those like horror movies that like you watch to like, yeah, this is kind of funny to watch. You know what I mean? Yeah, like I mentioned in previous examples of when I was talking about Godzilla, like a lot of those plots are not like great, but they're fun to watch. But I will definitely say like Claus's acting was like that carried the movie for me. I mean, I think Lucy's acting was actually really good too. It's very contrasting acting because she was just they show her so. I mean, she's a beautiful actress who plays her, but they constantly just showing how beautiful it is. Like they put like a light on her to make her glow, and she's very elegant and like angelic like, which is a good contrast to like Nosferatu, who's just this grotesque being who's creepy and a little whimsical too. Very good parallel acting choices. Those two carried the movie low-key. Now my biggest gripe with the movie is it is very different from both the book and the OG. Like it was like a child between the book and the old one. Like I said, like you used a lot of the characters' names. You basically made the first movie using the characters' names of Dracula, and then I guess at the end you had your own little twist there, which kind of lame, I'll be honest with you. No offense to a director, Werner Herzog. I loved your movie. I don't know if you're still alive. Are you? I'm clicking the link now. You're 82 right now. So if you ever listen to this, I love your movie, man. You live in, yeah, I love your movie, so don't hate me. Give me a good review on myself. But with that said, I think that's all I could talk about for this movie, So next on my list for my legacy of Nosferatu, thank you for watching. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. But yeah, next movie on the list, which is not necessarily a full-on Dracula Nosferatu movie, but more of a outsider's perspective. One might say kind of like a documentary, but like a scripted production documentary of a mockumentary, one might say, kind of it. I don't know. That's what I've heard people talk about. But we have featuring William Dafoe and John Malkovich. 2000s Shadow of the Vampire. Before starting this movie, I want to address to everybody that I have finished reading the book Dracula, and may I might tell you, there's a lot different from the book to like these adaptations. I haven't watched an actual like straight up Dracula adaptation, so maybe that'll be different. So I mean, Nosferatu is like an adaptation of an adaptation, whatever. But overall, very interesting book. A lot of people have some things to say about the ending, but I don't want to spoil too much. But yeah, if you read it, go read it. It's fun. But first of all, watch this with my friends, and The beginning intro is really long. Learned that in the beginning credits, it does say it's produced by Nick Cage, which is interesting because I know he played Dracula at one point in Renfield, so that's maybe he's always been a fan of vampires. So, like all Nosferatus I've seen, and if they don't do this a new one, I'm gonna be upset. They show a cat in the beginning. If I don't get a cat in the beginning of Nosferatu 2024, I'm walking out of the theater. There's a guy named Shrek. It's kind of funny. And I'm going basically, I have a list that I wrote as I watched the movie, and I'm just going to go down the list of my thoughts on the movie. But for those who don't know what Shadow of a Vampire is, basically, and I think I may have explained it at one point in this recording, but it is a movie that it's about them filming the original Nosferatu in the 1920s or whatever. So it takes place during that time. And in the movie, they get an actual vampire, John Malkovich's character, who's creepy. He might be just as creepy as Nosferatu himself. He gets the real vampire Nosferatu to record this movie. And so what I learned in the movie, nobody knows he's a vampire except John Malkovich. Over time, they get speculations that he is a vampire, right? But yeah, and he has some kind of deal with him I think he wants to drink the blood of the main actress, and that's why he got him involved. It's really weird, but it was an interesting story because it was like almost like watching a behind the scenes of the original movie, which would have been really hard to do because the technology wasn't there to record that kind of stuff really. So I thought that was very interesting. But like one of the first glances you really get to see that this man is William Dafoe as a vampire is he drinks a ferret's blood, which is interesting. Or like I guess they imply it. I'm recording this a few days later after I watched it, so it's phasey on like what I watched. But one thing I found very interesting, and I didn't think about it a whole lot, is when they're filming a lot of scenes, the director is like giving directions for the actors, and I realized that because it's a silent film, they could do that. Like you couldn't really necessarily do that now. Maybe I don't know how much like microphones pick up and stuff, but like yeah, he's like yelling at them like do this, do that, and then you could do that, I guess, because it's a silent film. And may I say that William Dafoe as Nosferatu is wonderful. I am now the point, I am obsessed with Nosferatu, just as a character and as his looks. This is me right here. This is me when I look at Nosferatu. He's just so ugly. I love him. I don't know what it is about him, and especially William Dafoe playing Nosferatu. I've seen different ways how Nosferatu is portrayed, and they all have different quirks, but overall he's creepy and a little goofy at times, a little silly. And I just wonder how our man Pennywise here is going to do it. If he does it anything kind of like it, that would be interesting. Although I feel it's going to go more of a more darker, creepier, scarier route. Let's just hope it's not Crow route. But I can see why William Dafoe was picked as Green Goblin. I see that. There were some interesting quotes he says. There's like a point where he's like, I drink like an old man, or he's like, I drink like the way old men pee, drop by drop, or a long stream. I don't know. It was just like, there's just things he said that I'm like, and then he just he like does his things with his nails, and it's just like, yes, queen, yes. But there are things he says in the movie that are very like, I felt it was the first time that I really saw Nosferatu as a human, because he talks about like how he longs for the sun, and then he sees it in a film, like he's watching it in a film, and obviously probably seen the sun in like years, and he talks about how he's like so old that he can't even make new vampires. There's like a scene where he's like talking to these dudes, because in the movie they basically say that he's a method actor. He pulls like a Jared Leto or whatever, and like you only talk to him as the Count. He's only known as the Count, and he's gonna stay in costume the whole time, But there's a part where he's like talking to these people drunk, and he's telling them about his life as a vampire, because they just assume he's just in character. And while he's talking, he like grabs like a bat, pulls an Aussie, and just like sucks up the blood from it. And they're just like, and he's like also drinking alcohol this time, and he's like getting super drunk, I guess. And he just walks away, and they're like, what an actor. So captivating. It's just like no one suspects that this man's a vampire, even though he's like been drinking the blood of his crew. But the main guy who plays who plays Thomas in the movie, he suspects some things. And then I also learned that in the movie he doesn't want to set sail to go film more scenes elsewhere, so he gets flown in instead. But they have to film some boat scenes, and he's like, you have to build me a boat, build a boat, and I'll film on the boat. And I learned this, I googled this, and I don't know how true it is, but it seems it is, that they actually did build a boat for those scenes. And I wonder if it was because the actor in real life was being dramatic, or they just did it because maybe they couldn't afford a boat. I don't know. But that was very interesting way to integrate real history into this movie. But when he was talking about to these other people part of the productions. There's some things that he says, like, you know, I guess you don't really think of about vampires. Like they asked him about the Dracula book, and he talks about it in like ways about like, you know, Dracula was, you know, there's things that like vampires live so long. He was like, how does a vampire know like how to feed a man if he hasn't fed himself in years? How does he, someone who's lived that long, even remember how to buy bread or even how to like make a bed? This stuff like that, when like, especially when you talked about the sun, it was just so, William Dafoe went all out for this role. And as of right now, it is a tie between Dafoe and Claus's version. So like, oh man, I love them both. It's hard for me to tell which one I like more at this point. We'll see how Skarsgård does, and we'll get back to you on that one. But then we have the Dread Pirate Roberts come in, and he just like guns a-blazing, just like shoot bullet gun. He's a, you know, I guess he's our cowboy character, which I also learned that he plays another character in Bram Stoker's. Does he might have played Arthur or Homewood from Dracula, or I don't think he plays Quincy. It's a version with Keanu Reeves as well. There's a lot of swapping of characters in these vampire things. John Malkovich yelled a lot, his character. And there were times where, like I said, he was just as creepy as William Dafoe's. But there were times where, like, the Count had to hide from the sun. Like this thing comes up, and all I can think about was the coward hiding in the shadows. But, like, probably the creepiest part of the whole movie is when they're filming the last scene, because at this point, like Nosferatu, he just wants to drink the blood of this actress, right? And she's a good chunk of the movie, everybody's high on drugs, you know, like, and it's crazy, like the kind of drugs that like everybody like, oh, we have like, I guess fentanyl now, but they're just getting high on like just like morphine and stuff back in these days. But for the last scene, they drug this woman to do the scene. Like, she suspects that something weird's going on, they drug her, and this is like at this point, like, you know, me and my friend are kind of like chuckling as William Dafoe's acting. But this point was very unsettling, and the whole time they're filming it, while like, yeah, he's actually drinking her blood and killing her, and they're just recording it, and they're all kind of aware that he's actually a vampire doing this. But I think their whole plan was they're trying to stall him till the sun comes up, and then they can kill him. But yeah, it was because at this point, you know, our Carrie here, you know, Robert, Dread Pirate Roberts, he tries to shoot Dracula, but then Dracula, he's just throwing the crew around, snapping their necks and killing them. And John Malkovich just keep recording, and the whole time he's directing, like, okay, Dracula, you know, Count, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. This is not good for the role. Keep going. Give me more passion, more blood. Really put the stake back, you know. And it's just like, and literally, the Count is no longer the villain. It is the director here. And then the last scene, basically, some guys break in because they know what's going on or whatever, and then the Count gets hit with the sunlight, and he records him dying. And then while he's rolling, he's, you know, when the Count dies, he's like, guys, I need to like kind of fix some stuff for the last shots here while I'm still recording. Yeah, you didn't know who was crazier, the Count or the director. And then it just kind of ends like that. And that last scene was just overall unsettling. Like, I could feel the room getting a little uncomfortable, you know. But overall, those are really overall great movie. I'm glad we rented it for $3.99. Thank you. But yeah, it was just, I love that movie, and it's definitely in probably like some of my top horror movies now. It's hard for me to say which of the Nosferatu adaptations that I really enjoyed the most. I mean, obviously the old one's a classic, but I'm not gonna sit there and say that like everything about it was like, I appreciate it for its history. You know, definitely some more modern adaptations are gonna be a little more eye-catching to me. But as far as the second and then Shadow Vampire versions, I can't decide between those two. It's like really hard, because I love Claus's adaptation so much, like the way he acted as Nosferatu. I think I like the story and the plot overall of the Shadow Vampire versus the second adaptation, Nosferatu the Vampyre. I just love Claus's adaptation. But William Dafoe also, like, just, he was so like, just, there's scenes where he's filming and he's just doing really stupid things while he's filming, because obviously he's a vampire. Something he doesn't understand, like he's looking at papers and he's like, what am I doing here, acting? Like, because he's not an actor, you know, he's just trying to suck some blood, you know. And he just does the facial expressions, the little, it's just pure cinema. William Dafoe crushed it. That whole movie was just, it's a weird, I don't know if I can say that I just feel like I haven't really seen a movie like that in my life. And that was like one of the first that I really like. Yeah, I can't explain it. If I think of another movie that may be like it, I've never seen this movie, but I'm assuming it's similar, is that movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If it's about like them kind of showing how like older Hollywood movies were filmed, maybe, you know, I can probably see it like that. But yeah, overall that movie was just, oh man, it's so good. I think it's the best out of all the three Nosferatu kind of movies, but Claus, I can't deny his Nosferatu take. I really just am so excited for the new one. I'm excited to see what they do with it. And yeah, I plan to make a whole separate video about that new one. But overall, this has been a fun project diving into vampires, Nosferatu. And for those who have sticked around this long, I really appreciate it so much. Thank you. None of this would have been possible without you. Well, you don't do my editing for me, but thank you for the views and the likes and the comments. Anyways, cheers out.
Time is an abyss, profound as 1,000 nights.